Forgive me sitting down, but I've just finished a couple of weeks fighting a couple of infections and the side effects of the antibiotics. Still not back to full power, so I hope that this will not be interrupted. But enough about me. I speak to you today trusting and believing in one living God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit. Amen. Palm Sunday. One of the strangest Sundays in the Christian calendar. On the face of it, straightforward. Palms were waved and strewn in front of Jesus as he made a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. But because so much happens before next Sunday, the day is also used quite often to look at what we now call Holy Week. So as well as the triumphant entry, we have to be thinking about Jesus turning over the tables of the moneylenders, money changers in the temple. Those people who were scamming the tourists in town for the Passover festival, convincing them that the only way they could worship God was by spending outrageous amounts of money. We have to be thinking about how Jesus wept for his temple and his city and what the future held for it. We have to be thinking about Jesus teaching in the temple, teaching that old rituals, old traditions were not always the way forward to live a good and prosperous life. We think about the parables that he told, the widow's mite, talking about the humility of giving from little as opposed to the pride of giving from much. We have to think about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, showing them that he comes as a servant and not as a master, and giving them an example of what they should be doing. We have to be thinking about this band of disciples having this Passover meal together, this last one. A meal already steeped in history and remembrance among the people who sat round the table, but which now has a much more interesting significance for us and is remembered all around the world all the time in normal circumstances. So what about the people who cheered Jesus into the town? A few days later they were crying for his blood. What had happened in the minds of these people to change so much? The fact is, nothing had changed in their minds. They had wanted a particular type of disciple. They knew how the disciple would arrive because it said so in the scriptures, and each year they reenacted this little triumphant entry, but this year it seemed different. The man at the head of the procession, they knew. They'd heard about him healing, they'd heard about him teaching and preaching, they'd heard about him challenging the authorities and seeming to have answers for them. So here was the Messiah they'd longed for, a Messiah who would set them free from the Roman occupation. By the end of the week, despite Jesus' teachings, despite his explanations, their minds were still the same. And he'd not lived up to their job description. And they were angry. I think it's often the same these days when sometimes we think of something and we become so entrenched in our minds that nothing will change. Nothing will let us see what opportunities arise out of really rethinking the way that we do things. We know that people out there hold grudges and prejudices about Jesus, about the church and about Christians, which are so hard to change. But we also know that through Jesus that can happen. In our world today, so much is changing that we can't affect. So much of our tradition, of our habits, are just having to go out of the window. I wonder if we contemplate the fact that Jesus rides into this situation, rides in as our Messiah, as a bringer of peace and love. An Englishman, an Irishman, a Scotsman, a Welshman, a Frenchman, a Belgian, a German, an Italian, a Greek, an Israeli, a Syrian, an Afghan, an Indian, a South African, an Australian, a Filipino, a New Zealander, a Cook Islander, and a Papua New Guinean walked into a very exclusive pub. The barman raises his hand and says, "Sorry guys, I can't serve you without a tie." Our Messiah comes for everybody, with everybody. He gives everybody the opportunity to follow and to understand and to serve and to love. So I pray in our time of enforced change that we will know which of the traditions we've been hanging on to are no use to us in our relationship with our Messiah, with our Jesus, with our God.